I think it's the rigidity of our ways of thinking that prevent us from being helpful to one another. And I think we have to free ourselves from old patterns that no longer work and find a way into healing. So it's very difficult because the rules that we have can be helpful, but sometimes they have to be relaxed in order to bring a greater good. And I think that's going to be a difficult thing. The legal system is very conservative, does not want to change. But I think we need to rediscover what the real heart of justice is, and that is that our duty to us, to each other, is really fundamentally the way we're truly just to one another is to love one another. That's what we owe each and every person, is love. So the legal system has to accommodate that duty of love that we have, and it's going to be difficult, but I think it's worthwhile, and it brings joy. Once you go there, it's a much more joyful experience for all involved. So I was a public defender for 12 years at 26 in California, and which is where our criminal courts are located here in Chicago. And I became acquainted with the two men who were chaplains to both the jail at 26th Street and to the juvenile detention center, Father Larry Craig and Father David Kelly. I kept up with Father Kelly, and he founded Precious Blood Ministry for Reconciliation, which is at 51st and Elizabeth. And I visited with him a number of times there. And because I had served this population, court-involved youth, for many, many years, I really knew these young men, mostly young men who work at Precious Blood, some women. Most of the women are returning citizens, not people who are court-involved at the moment. And what struck me was how vital these young men were compared with the young men I would visit in the prison, in the jail, in the detention center. And so I got to know what was the source of this vitality. Where was this life coming from? And Father Kelly runs a really wonderful place where they have a several-acre farm, they have beekeeping, there's a rap music studio, there's an art gallery, there's a printmaking shop where they print shirts and sell them. It's a wonderful facility, but at the heart of all this is the use of peace circles and restorative justice. And restorative justice used in help to the courts in taking cases out of the court system and allowing restoration for the community, but also restoration within the community. And it really attracted me because of that vitality I saw in these young men's faces and their smiles and the joy they were expressing, which is not something you get from young men who are court involved ordinarily. The system works to sort of deaden and exterminate life. And here was a place, and here was a method where instead of exterminating life, they were bringing people to life and showing them and revealing these young men as wonderful human beings who are capable of love and capable of peacemaking and healing for their own community. And not, as they're treated in the court system, as garbage to be thrown out into our penitentiary system. So that was my real first taste of restorative justice practices. So we've been working hard in Cook County to bring in restorative justice in the courts. We have 4 restorative justice courtrooms in Chicago. I worked very hard with the Catholic Lawyers Guild to create a privilege for peace circles so that nothing said in peace circles could be used to prosecute people, so they could be really fully disclosing, because some of the problem is that when you're fully disclosing, you may be disclosing past criminal conduct, which could subject you to prosecution. But one of the things about peace circles to be effective is you have to tell everything. So we want people to be protected. And we worked very hard to get that passed here in Chicago. And it brought me into contact with people I wouldn't have ordinarily thought would be advocates for the restorative justice method. So our Coalition Against Sexual Exploitation of Women here in Chicago was our main ally in getting restorative justice privilege language passed. They were the witnesses who testified. And part of their experience has been that the criminal legal system is not very sensitive to their needs and not very effective to what they want. What they want most, or in many instances, is an acknowledgement by the perpetrator that something wrong was done and some amendment on the part of this person, especially in the case of acquaintance rape. And that the criminal legal system just drags out the prosecution for years, and then it ends up with some plea deal which they have nothing to do with. And they end up feeling more violated in some ways by the process than they did by the initial assault. So they really are an advocate of women having the opportunity to have restorative justice as a option, which struck me as just, again, I don't know why I was surprised by that, but it was not something I would have expected. And again, shows you often we have prejudices, which once we become, again, as Brian Stevens said, proximate to people who are suffering, you understand your prejudices don't have any relationship, because you have an ideology that you're imposing upon another person's experience. And you have no understanding of that experience unless you talk and listen to them. And so that's been really transformative, is to learn that. And I think, what I would hope is that we wouldn't just see the restorative practices as limited to our restorative justice courts, but think of that in every kind of situation in which there's conflict and suffering, is that there's always a chance to give voice and to advocate for healing. And I think sometimes that, we have to be innovative. Well, it's something where it's really sort of unique in that I am a civil judge. So I do lawsuits regarding money damages. And for many years, for 10 years, I was doing tort cases, which are death or great bodily harm. But recently, since January 2022, I've been doing business disputes. But I found that I can use a restorative practice in my courtroom, which deals simply with business disputes. And it's been very interesting to me. So we have pretrial settlement conferences where the parties meet with the judge alone. So the party, the plaintiff, and their lawyers meet with me, and then the defense and their lawyers. And so one practice that has sort of evolved, and I think it's the influence of restorative practices on me, is that for the first hour of a settlement conference, I'll just listen to the plaintiff tell me what they're going through. And the lawyer will try to interrupt. That isn't relevant. I want to hear everything. I want to hear the whole story of what is your suffering. And likewise, I do that for the defense as well. And what's interested me in this is, and I think it is a kind of restorative practice, is that it gives people voice, which for us as human beings, that's really important. It gives us a sense of dignity, of being heard, and the ability to have voice in the presence of somebody who symbolizes the community is a kind of restoration, is that the community is hearing you. So I stand for the community. I do empathetic listening with them. I try to understand and voice support and acknowledgement of their suffering. And this has been one of the things I've remarked on this is it's a very extremely important experience for them. People cry, people really demonstrate how much this means to them. But it's been a healing experience for me in that ordinarily court systems are more transactional. And because I allow this inbreaking of humanity into what people presume is going to be a sort of rigidly transactional setting, I find that I experience a great deal of warmth and healing, and I experience their love and an appreciation for being heard. And so I think it's an example of how we can be innovative and use restorative practices, even if we're not doing a peace circle per se, in all kinds of dispute resolution. So I think it's important. And I've been doing dialogues around the country about criminal justice, the Catholic Criminal Justice Reform dialogues, where we dialogue with system impacted and system responsible people. And one of the things both victims and the formerly incarcerated say about our criminal justice system is that they were never heard. And that wounds them so much that their voices were never heard. So I think in all of our settings, whether it's schools or courts, any kind of institutions, when we can make sure that those who symbolize the community open up to listening to those who are most affected and impacted by division and harm and hurt, that is a healing thing for all parties concerned. And that dialogue informed me that that's what we need, is we need situations in which love becomes possible across barriers of difference, especially in the criminal legal system, as some people call it, where there's extreme marginalization by people responsible in the system of those who are the participants. They don't ever get a chance to relate to them as human beings because they're just a person in a jumpsuit or a spectator in the crowd. And my hope is to get those dialogues, because I think they will shape the minds of the system responsible, the people in corrections, police, the judiciary, prosecutors, defense lawyers, to really be alert to the humanity of the people that they're working with, and not instrumentalize or objectify them, but see them as primarily and really exclusively human beings, just like us, with pains and sorrows, dreams. And I think that's at the heart of, I think, what's needed in terms of really truly reform our system, is that acknowledgement of our common humanity that stretches across those barriers of difference. And that will be the best shaper of policy reform and best practices, is always remembering on both sides we're human beings. In the evening of our lives, we shall be examined on love. That is what we owe each other. And I've come more and more to see that the definition of justice that we're used to employing, which is to give each their due, isn't enough. That we need to understand what is due is our relationship of love. And that has to be all embracing. And I think it's something that has to encompass everybody you encounter. It has to be the people that you work with, the people you see on the street, the people that you maybe don't agree with. It has to, and Dr. Martin Luther King, in his sermon that he gave on Christmas Eve, the year before he died, talked about love and the agape love that he thought was so central. Dr. King really believed that unless we love one another, we'll all go down in flames together. And Dr. King also said that the seed that you plant contains the fruit, that you can't come to a peaceful end through violent means. If you are hateful, you're never going to come up with a loving end. And so we have to find a way to love one another across our differences, even when they are very bitter differences, even when that person has harmed somebody who's close to us or us. And I think it's difficult in our age because our age, is just take care of yourself and get the other guy. I think there's a lot of that spirit. We think of justice as score settling. I got hurt, therefore I have to hurt you. And that's our culture. It's very deeply embedded into our culture. And even people like you and me, when we do get hurt, often revert to that score settling version of justice. It's very painful to see that even good people revert to a score settling mentality when they themselves are affected. And that's why the witness of the formerly incarcerated to me is so profound, and to victims who are willing to participate in restorative justice, because that willingness to forgive is a prophetic voice against that score settling version of justice, that our end goal is to be restored and to be healed and to be one, and that is the fulfillment of our humanity.